The spotlight hit her like a punch-bright, unrelenting, and far too soon. Elise Marlowe stepped onto the stage in a wrinkled linen dress and canvas shoes that had long given up their color. She looked like someone who'd wandered into the wrong room-meek posture, pale nerves visible beneath her skin, hair tied in a low, unstyled knot. The stage, with its velvet curtains and golden trim, wasn't built for women like her. A wave of laughter rippled through the auditorium. Phones raised, smirks exchanged. A judge coughed loudly, theatrically. "And you are?" the host asked, voice laced with disbelief. "My name is Elise," she whispered, clutching the mic like a lifeline. "I came to sing for my father." Another laugh. A judge rolled their eyes. No one knew. This wasn't a farm girl. This was a storm wrapped in linen, ready to tear down the room. Stay to the end. You'll want to see what happens when the world realizes it tried to bury brilliance under a dress they didn't understand. If stories like this move you, subscribe, and don't miss what happens when dignity fights back. Elise Marlowe didn't look like someone who belonged on a national stage. Not in a place where talent was supposed to come wrapped in rhinestones and vocal fry. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She was the kind of woman people forgot in checkout lines and skipped over at waiting rooms. She came from a two-stoplight town in rural Ohio, the kind where dreams were left hanging on wooden fences and blown away with the first cold wind. For the last 5 years, she had worked at the local pharmacy stocking aspirin, ringing up cough syrup, sweeping floors before closing. She always took the evening shift. It was quieter then. No one asked about her life before, and no one knew. Elise had once been called a prodigy. At 14, she could sing the Queen of the Night aria in perfect pitch. At 16, she received an invitation, rare, prestigious, to study at a conservatory in Vienna. Not just any conservatory, the conservatory, the one her father, Arthur Marlowe, had once graced as a tenor of global renown. But Vienna never heard Elise's voice. Because at 17, Arthur collapsed in the kitchen with a stroke that left him half paralyzed and unable to speak. Her mother was already gone, and Elise, just a teenager, made a choice. She stayed. She became his caretaker, his translator, his nurse, his only family. She filled their small home with lullabies and Schubert to keep him smiling. When he could no longer move his fingers to conduct the melody, she placed his hand over her heart so he could feel it. By the time he died, Elise was 28. Her voice, like her dreams, had been kept in the attic quiet, untouched, hidden under boxes labeled "Later." And then, one day, while watching a rerun of America's Got Talent on her lunch break, she saw a contestant butcher, Nessun Dorma. The judges praised him, called him bold, called it raw. Elise laughed so hard she cried. Later that night, she took out her father's old scorebook, blew off the dust, and for the first time in a decade, sang again. When she submitted the online audition form, she didn't tell anyone, not even the pastor's wife who occasionally visited her after Sunday service. She didn't come here to be discovered, or to win. She came here because her father once told her, "One day, someone will hear your voice, and the world will hush." So when the judges raised their brows, when the influencers giggled, when the agents whispered, "Why is she even here?" Elise didn't flinch. She stood at the center of the stage, in her wrinkled dress and tired shoes, and held the microphone like it was the last thread tethering her to the man who once believed in her more than the world ever could. The silence after Elise introduced herself wasn't just awkward, it was sharp, expectant, hungry, a beat too long, and then the laughter came. Not the belly-deep kind born from joy, but the cruel, clipped sort sharpened by disbelief. A man in the third row leaned sideways and whispered just loud enough. "She looks like she wandered off a Greyhound bus and into a finale taping." Phones were already raised. Hashtags were forming in real time. Farm girl finalist. Laundry dress debacle. Behind the long judges' panel, 4 figures sat gleaming under the lights. Simon Westlake, ever the icy oracle, glanced at Elise without lifting his head. Vanessa Royal, draped in sequins, and superiority shifted in her chair, barely hiding a smirk. "Elise," Simon said slowly, resting his chin on folded fingers, "what exactly are we about to hear? Because, judging from the ensemble," he gestured vaguely at her wrinkled linen and scuffed shoes, "I hope it's not a bedtime story for your tractor." Ripples of laughter rolled through the auditorium. Someone in the balcony gave a fake moo. Elise's grip tightened on the mic. She didn't speak. Vanessa leaned forward. "Darling, this is America's Got Talent, not whatever town fair you escaped from. We celebrate stars here, not Sunday school singers with yard sale wardrobes." The comment landed like a slap. Several influencers sitting in the front row who'd built entire careers on mocking hopefuls began recording. Their cameras zoomed in on Elise's trembling hands. One of them, a platinum blonde TikTok star in a rhinestone blazer, whispered, "Watch her cry. That's the clip I want." Up in the mezzanine, a group of music industry agents exchanged knowing glances. One waved his business card like a flag. "Let's not waste too much time, sweetheart," he called out. "Vegas has standards." A second judge, eyes painted like a peacock, reached across and gently tapped her buzzer. The red X above her glowed to life. A few audience members cheered. And still, Elise said nothing. She looked like stone, like a cathedral wall refusing to crack. But her eyes, they shimmered with something too complex to name. Simon rolled his eyes. "This is painful," he said flatly. "Go on then. Sing. Prove me wrong." More laughter. Another red X lit up. Then another. Only Vanessa held off, her finger hovering as if daring Elise to even try. The pianist, seated at the far left of the stage, looked confused. "Still want me to cue it?" he whispered into his mic. Elise nodded once. The music swelled. Strings, soft and tentative, the opening bars of Nessun Dorma. A collective groan rolled through the audience. "Oh, come on," someone shouted. "Another one of those?" Vanessa chuckled, finally slamming her buzzer. The red light screamed above Elise's head like a public execution. 3 buzzers, 3 X's, no words. Just her, and the silence, and the microphone. The lights above her blinked an angry red. 3 buzzers, 3 rejections. She hadn't sung a single note, yet the verdict had been delivered like a sentence, merciless, premature, public. Somewhere near the wings, a producer motioned for the stagehands to prepare the next act. A few audience members rose from their seats, assuming the show would move on. The influencer with the rhinestone blazer whispered gleefully, "This is gold, she'll cry any second now." But Elise didn't move. She closed her eyes. The stage was chaos. But inside, she was in the kitchen of a weathered farmhouse in Ohio, her father's broken voice humming along to Puccini as she stirred soup over a cracked stovetop. He couldn't speak then, but he could still listen. And so she sang. Not for the judges, not for the lights, not for the millions watching with popcorn in their laps and judgment on their tongues. She sang for him. The first note escaped like a breath wrapped in thunder. Rich, deep, controlled. The kind of tone that doesn't just fill a room, it silences it. The audience stilled. A woman in the third row lowered her phone. A teenager in the back, mid-laugh, choked on his gum. Elise's voice climbed higher and higher, scaling the impossible walls of Nessun Dorma with precision that would have made a cathedral weep. The timbre of her soprano sliced through the artificial fog and shallow glamour like glass through silk. And then she hit it. That note, the one Puccini wrote, not for technique, but for truth. It rose from somewhere deep within her, bursting through every insult, every buzz, every eye roll and cruel chuckle. Her canvas shoes stayed rooted, but her voice soared flawless, defiant, devastating. A murmur broke in the crowd. Whispers, then gasps. Vanessa's polished smile fell from her face. Her hand slowly slid away from her buzzer. Simon Westlake leaned forward, his brows drawn, mouth slightly parted. He didn't blink. The mezzanine where talent agents had once jeered was now silent. No more waving business cards, no more chuckles, just wide eyes and regret. By the time Elise reached the final crescendo, some were already on their feet. Others clutched their chests, stunned into reverence. Even the influencers stopped recording, too ashamed, too moved. The last note rang out, impossibly clear. And for a full 5 seconds, no one breathed. Not because they were unsure what had just happened, but because they knew exactly what had, and they had failed to see it coming. The final note still hovered in the air like incense, curling upward into the rafters before dissolving into a silence so thick it felt holy. No one clapped. Not yet. They couldn't. The room was frozen, suspended between disbelief and awe. Simon Westlake, the man whose sneers had built a career, was now gripping the edge of the judging panel, knuckles pale. He looked as if someone had knocked the wind out of him. Vanessa Royale blinked hard, her diamond-encrusted facade cracking, her hand trembling as it covered her lips. Then, slowly, from the back of the theater, a figure rose. He wasn't part of the main show, not a judge, not a celebrity. He sat in the orchestra section, surrounded by no cameras, no entourage, just presence. Maestro Julian Roth, the legendary conductor, the man who had led operas from Milan to Salzburg, the kind of name spoken in conservatories like a prayer. He stepped into the aisle, adjusting his grey suit and bow tie with silent reverence. When he spoke, his voice was low and sure, and yet it echoed through the auditorium like a verdict. "Elise Marlowe," he said. She turned, surprised. She hadn't seen him, hadn't known he was even in the room. "You are the daughter of Arthur Marlowe," Roth continued. "Are you not?" The cameras whipped toward her. A hush fell even deeper somehow. She nodded. "My God," Roth whispered. Then louder, to the judges. "Do you understand who she is? Her father was the finest tenor of his generation. My colleague, my friend." Simon shifted, visibly rattled. We didn't know." "No," Roth cut in, his voice sharpened. "Because you didn't bother to ask." He turned back to the crowd. "Elise was offered a place at the Vienna Royal Conservatory at age 16, he said. A full scholarship, but she declined it. Why?" He looked to her, giving her permission. Elise took a breath. "My father had a stroke," she said softly. "He couldn't move, couldn't speak. I stayed to take care of him. I didn't sing for a long time. Not in public, not until now." A murmur passed through the crowd, this time not of ridicule but remorse. The influencers lowered their phones. Even the security guards near the stage stood straighter, like they'd just realized they were in the presence of something sacred. Roth faced the judges once more. "And you buzzed her before she sang." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The shame in the room did it for him. Vanessa looked down, her glittering lashes shielding tear-filled eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Simon exhaled, the showman mask gone. "Elise," he said slowly, hoarsely. "Your voice is not just extraordinary, it's transcendent. I've made a mistake." But Elise didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded, like someone who had learned long ago that truth didn't need to shout. Maestro Roth stepped closer to her. "If you would allow it," he said, "I would be honored to conduct you at the Philharmonic. I believe the world owes you a stage, one that listens first." A few sobs escaped the crowd. Applause began soft, reverent like raindrops. The red X's above Elise's head flickered and went dark. The applause rolled in, slowly hesitant, like the first raindrops on dry earth. Then, all at once, the room erupted, not with cheers, but with reverence. It wasn't the kind of standing ovation that demanded more. It was the kind that begged forgiveness. Simon Westlake stood, visibly shaken, the ever-confident judge suddenly boyish, uncertain. He raised his hand like a white flag. "Elise," he said, voice cracking under the weight of his own regret. "I've never been so wrong." He gestured toward the blinking red X, still lit above his name. "This," he said, "this should have never happened." Then, without waiting for approval, he reached up and pressed a button beneath his desk. The red light flickered once, then vanished. A few feet down, Vanessa Royale sat motionless. Her sequined dress, so perfectly lit minutes earlier, now looked garish under the truth. She stared at Elise as if seeing her for the first time. The same woman she'd called yard sale karaoke now stood radiant in silence, her voice still echoing in the walls. "I spoke with cruelty," Vanessa said finally, standing on trembling heels. "And I spoke from fear. Fear that someone so plain could outshine everything we thought glittered." She turned to the crowd. "I owe you all an apology. But more than that, Elise, I owe you one." And she did something no one had ever seen her do in the show's history. She stepped down from the judge's platform, walked barefoot across the stage, and stood beside Elise. Then, with the cameras still rolling and millions watching live, she took Elise's hand in both of hers and whispered into the microphone, "We were wrong, and you are what this show was meant to find." The influencer, Rosant, smug and smirking, were now pale, silent. One by one, they lowered their phones. The ring lights went dim. Hashtags like "Farm Girl Flop" vanished from screens, replaced by "Elise Rising" and "The Voice We Ignored." Backstage, the producers were already scrambling. Clip packages were being re-edited in real time. A team huddled around the Golden Buzzer station, whispering and nodding furiously. Then came the sound. Clunk. A judge's hand slammed down. Golden confetti exploded from the rafters. The host, who hadn't spoken since Elise began singing, stepped onto the stage, shaking his head in awe. "I've seen hundreds of acts," he said into the mic, "but never one that made this much noise, by standing so still." The Golden Buzzer storm swirled around Elise, showering her in light. Still, she didn't cry, didn't gloat. She stood perfectly still, like a cathedral built from silence, sorrow, and steel. In the wings, one of the stylists who had once mocked her whispered to a fellow crew member, "She's not even smiling. She doesn't have to." Because Elise hadn't come for fame. She came to keep a promise. And she had. The confetti settled slowly, like golden ash after a fire. Around Elise, the judges stood in silence. The audience remained on their feet, but no one cheered now. They watched her with reverence as if waiting for a benediction. Vanessa still held her hand, but Elise gently withdrew, not unkindly, just calm, composed. Above her, the Golden Buzzer lights continued to pulse, but she didn't look up. She turned instead toward the microphone, the same one she had clutched like a lifeline only minutes ago. Now, she barely needed it. She leaned forward. Her voice was soft, but it filled the space with precision, sharper than any applause. "Don't judge a woman by her dress," she said, her gaze locking on Simon, then Vanessa, then the blinking cameras beyond. "Don't judge her by her hair, her shoes, or how quietly she walks onto your stage." The silence thickened. Even backstage crews froze. Because when she opens her mouth to sing, she just might remind you who you were before you forgot what beauty really sounds like. The final line struck like thunder. No screaming, no dramatics. Just words clean, precise, devastating. Simon's hand dropped to his chest. Vanessa lowered her head. A few audience members wiped their eyes. Elise didn't wait for applause. She stepped away from the mic, turned slowly, and walked off stage. Her canvas shoes made no sound on the polished floor. The camera tried to follow, but she was already disappearing into the shadow of the curtain. She didn't wave, didn't pose, didn't smile. And she didn't need to, because her voice had done what no Golden Buzzer, no standing ovation, no viral hashtag ever could. It had ended the performance by finishing the conversation. Elise Marlowe never returned for an encore. Not during that episode, not for the results show, not even when the producers begged her to take a bow on the season finale. She had no interest in going viral, no desire to capitalize on outrage or redemption. She disappeared as quietly as she had entered, like fog that left behind the scent of rain and the echo of something sacred. But her voice stayed. Clips of her performance flooded every platform within hours. Not for the confetti, not for the drama, but for the silence that came after her final note, a silence so deep, even the harshest critics didn't dare fill it with commentary. Headlines read like confessions. We were wrong about her. The woman who made Simon cry. The voice that shamed a nation. The hashtag Silent Soprano trended for weeks, not because Elise asked for it, but because the world needed a name for what they had witnessed. Dignity louder than performance. Grace that didn't need a spotlight. Applications to music schools soared. Choir programs in small towns across the country saw record sign-ups. High school girls in thrift store shoes posted shaky covers of Nessun Dormino trying to copy Elise's voice, but trying to find their own. As for the judges, their reputations were forever split in two, before Elise and after. Simon Westlake issued a public statement. Her silence taught me more than my words ever have. Vanessa Royale founded a scholarship in Arthur Marlowe's name for young artists who didn't look the part, but lived it. And somewhere in Ohio, in a small wood-framed house with a piano missing its middle C, Elise still sings. Not for stages, not for likes. For memory, for love, for the man who once told her, "One day, someone will hear your voice, and the world will hush." He was right. And when the world finally did, it stayed quiet.